Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our really intensive look at these core teachings about the end of the age.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey through these texts, moving from, wisdom and getting ready to stewardship.
Right, the 10 virgins, the talents,
hmm
all about personal preparation.
Exactly. Sustain wisdom like the oil, and then that active, loyal use of what you've been given, like the servants with the talents.
But today, we're shifting gears a bit. We're moving beyond just individual readiness and stepping onto, well, the biggest stage imaginable,
Yeah.
the final judgment.
The grand finale, so to speak.
We're diving deep into that incredibly powerful conclusion in Matthew 25, the separation of the sheep and the goats. This is arguably the king's last word in this teaching block on what really seals someone's eternal destiny.
It really is the ultimate test, isn't it? And our mission today, well, it's kind of threefold. First, we really need to unpack the criteria here. They're surprisingly practical, the things used in this judgment. What specifically leads to separation?
Yeah, that's number one. What's number two?
Second, we've got to figure out who these sheep and goats actually are. Because, interestingly, both groups call the judge Lord. That's a huge clue.
Okay, so they're not just random outsiders then.
That's the implication we need to explore. And finally, the third thing is connecting this very practical, almost mundane test of everyday actions back to the really big picture. The theology of grace, free will, and maybe even the whole point of creation itself.
That last point feels crucial. We're not just reading a story.
Yeah.
We need to grasp the cosmic significance, why this test, why now?
Exactly. It ties everything together.
Okay, so let's jump in. Let's set the scene. Describe this moment of judgment for us.
Well, majestic doesn't quite cover it.
Majestic is a good start, but yeah, the source paints an incredible picture. It says, the Son of Man arrives in his glory. And not just him, but all the angels with him.
All the angels. Wow.
And he takes his seat on this throne of glory. This isn't the wandering teacher anymore. This is the king, the judge. Returning to execute judgment, establish his rule. The authority is just absolute. You can almost feel the shift in the atmosphere. And the scope, it says all nations are gathered. Every single nation.
Right. Pantata ethno in Greek, often translated all the Gentiles or all the peoples, it signifies a universal gathering. This isn't just about one group or one place. It's global, comprehensive.
So everyone who's ever lived.
That seems to be the implication. Everyone stands before this throne, and the separation starts immediately. It's decisive.
And the analogy used is a shepherd.
Yeah, a shepherd dividing his flock, sheep from goats. It's an image everyone back then would have instantly understood. Simple, clear, final.
Sheep on the right, goats on the left. The right hand is usually the place of honor, isn't it?
Traditionally, yes. Blessing, favor. The left hand. Well, less so. The sheep, valued, may be seen as followers, they're on the right. The goats may be seen as more stubborn, independent, less valuable in some ways. They're on the left. It's a stark visual.
Okay, let's focus on the right hand first. The sheep. What happens to them?
They get this incredible invitation, Matthew 25.34. The king calls them blessed by my Father. And he says, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world.
Prepared from the foundation of the world. That's huge.
It is. The source really emphasizes this. This kingdom wasn't plan B. It wasn't some emergency measure because things went wrong with Adam. It was the original design, the goal from the very beginning.
So what did they do to get this inheritance? If it's the original plan, what's the qualification? Is it about knowing all the right doctrines, believing the right things?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe challenging for some. The text doesn't mention theological exams or creedal statements. The criteria laid out are 6 very specific, very tangible acts of service. Hands-on stuff.
What are they?
Giving food to the hungry, drink to the thirsty, welcoming the stranger hospitality, clothing the naked, visiting the sick, and visiting those in prison.
The 6 acts of mercy.
Exactly. That's the explicit standard given right here for inheriting the kingdom in this final judgment scene.
Okay, I have to admit, like you said, this is surprising.
Yeah?
It feels almost secular in a way. Just basic human decency. If this is the test for eternal destiny, it seems grounded entirely in how people treated each other. Not their vertical relationship with God, but their horizontal one.
It certainly looks that way on the surface, doesn't it? And that's a tension we absolutely have to wrestle with later when we talk about grace versus works. It's a critical point. But let's stay with the scene for just a moment longer because the reaction of the sheep is maybe the most revealing part.
What do? They accept the kingdom, right?
Well, yes, but not before expressing complete shock. They're invited in, told they passed the test, and their response is genuine confusion. They ask, Lord, when? When did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink?
They don't remember doing it for him specifically.
Exactly. When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? They have no recollection of serving the king directly in these ways.
So what does that tell us about them?
It tells us their righteousness wasn't performative. It wasn't a calculated strategy to earn points with God. They weren't keeping a checklist, okay, fed a hungry person today, check.
It was just how they lived.
It seems so. Organic, natural. They were simply responding to human need as they encountered it, seemingly without realizing the eternal significance of those actions. They weren't trying to impress the judge. They were just loving their neighbor. They didn't even know they were acing the final exam.
And then the king's answer that ties it all together.
It does. He says, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Boom. That's the core.
He completely identifies himself with the needy, the vulnerable, the marginalized.
An almost unbelievable equation, right? The glorious king on the throne says his identity is bound up with the suffering person you meet on the street. Service to them is service to him.
Now that phrase, one of the least of these my brethren, or brothers and sisters of mine, that feels like the absolute linchpin of the whole passage. Who exactly are these brethren?
You've hit the nail on the head. That is probably the most debated phrase here. Does brethren mean every single human being in need? If so, the judgment is based on universal humanitarianism.
Which is how many people read it.
Yes. Or does it refer more specifically to the king's followers, the community of believers? If that's the case, then the test is more about loyalty, love, and compassion shown within the faith community. It's a test of how believers treat each other, especially those struggling.
Okay, we definitely need to dig into that distinction in the next section. It changes the whole dynamic. But first, let's look across the aisle, so to speak. The left hand. The goats.
Right. If the sheep got an invitation, the goats get, well, the opposite, condemnation.
How is it phrased?
It's harsh. Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels.
Whoa, everlasting fire. Prepared for the devil and his angels, not even originally for humans.
That's what the text says. The destination was intended for the adversary. The implication is that the goats, through their actions or lack thereof, have aligned themselves with that destiny. It's a destination they chose, in effect.
And the reason for their condemnation.
It's the mirror image of the sheep's commendation. They failed the exact same test. Verse 42 and 43. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me.
So it's not about terrible sins they committed, necessarily, but about the good they failed to do. Sins of omission.
That's precisely the focus here. Neglect. Failure to act. Failure to show compassion in these specific, practical ways.
And what's their reaction?
Yeah.
Do they just accept it?
No, and this is critical. They too are confused and defensive. They respond, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?
They also call him Lord.
Yes. Just like the sheet. They use the title, Curious Lord. That's a massive piece of evidence we have to deal with when we try to identify who these groups are. They acknowledge his authority, at least nominally.
And the king's reply to their defense.
It's the chilling echo of his words to the sheep. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Failure to serve the needy among the least of these was a direct failure to serve the king himself.
So the standard is identical. Service or lack of service to the vulnerable is service or lack of service to the king.
Exactly. And the outcome couldn't be more polarized. Verse 46, then the goats will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous, the sheep, to eternal life. The source uses the terms yangbyeo for eternal punishment and yangseng for eternal life. The separation is absolute and permanent.
Okay, the scene is set, the criteria are laid out, the outcomes are clear. Now the big question, who are these people? How can two groups, both standing there, both calling him Lord, end up on such dramatically different paths? That's what we need to unpack next.
Right. That word Lord is the key that unlocks this, according to the source material we're looking at. The fact that the goats use it suggests they aren't, complete pagans or atheists who had zero connection to the king or his community.
They recognized him. They acknowledged his position, at least with their words.
Precisely. So the source argues, look, if this judgment includes all nations, it must encompass those who received God's law, who were part of the covenant people in some sense, whether Old Testament Israel or the New Testament church.
Because if they were just random people with no knowledge, why judge them by this standard? Why separate them like faulty members of the flock?
Exactly. The source suggests true outsiders might be judged differently, or perhaps are considered insignificant in this specific context, like, say, wild animals compared to sheep and goats within a managed flock. The very act of separating the goats implies they were part of the group he was assessing.
So the goats are insiders.
Yeah.
People who maybe professed faith.
That's the interpretation here. They could be seen as those who had, at some point, maybe received forgiveness of sins. They were brought into the fold, but they ultimately balked at the real commitment. They didn't truly follow through.
So these could be the foolish virgins without oil, or the wicked, lazy servant who buried his talent. People who had an opportunity but failed the test of genuine faithfulness.
Yes, they fit that pattern perfectly. They received grace, they were given an invitation, but they failed when it came to practical application, readiness, and authentic loyalty.
And what's the core sin identified here? If they called him Lord, what went wrong?
The source identifies it clearly as hypocrisy. The Korean term used is osikanian adu, the hypocrites. Their punishment, the source notes, is the one reserved specifically for hypocrites.
Define hypocrisy in this context. What does it mean to be a hypocrite here?
It means acting like you honor the king, maybe saying the right words, showing up for the meetings, but deep down you don't. You're just pretending. You might acknowledge the king's title, but reject his actual nature and his commands. You wear the jersey, but you're not really on the team.
So it's about the heart's direction again. Not just external actions, but the inner alignment. What was their fundamental error? Why did they fail to act?
The source points to a critical failure. The refusal to recognize and honor God when he appears in weakness or vulnerability. The goats, essentially, are fair weather followers. They're happy to serve the king when he's glorious, powerful, maybe handing out blessings.
But not when he identifies with the poor, the sick, the prisoner.
Exactly. That version of the king is inconvenient, costly. It doesn't align with their desire for comfort or status. This mirrors, the source argues, the religious leaders described elsewhere in the scriptures. Think about how they'd meticulously follow certain rules, but then Jesus would condemn them for neglecting justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Or how in Malachi the priests are accused of despising God's name while asking, "How have we despised your name?" They were blind to their own hypocrisy, offering lame sacrifices while keeping up appearances.
They had the form of religion, but denied its power, maybe.
Or denied its demands. The source suggests these types would have eagerly welcomed a Messiah who came as a conquering king, like the one prophesied in Daniel 2, crushing empires. That's a God of power they could get behind.
But they couldn't handle a God who came as a vulnerable human, pointing out their sin, associating with the lowly.
Precisely. That version of God was offensive. It required humility, repentance, and actual love, not just adherence to power structures. So they served the power of God, perhaps, but not the love of God, especially when that love demands solidarity with the weak.
So, the goat is the person who despises the king. When they see him reflected in a hungry neighbor, a sick friend, someone imprisoned. Because that reflection doesn't offer them glory or comfort, it demands sacrifice.
Yes, it demands inconvenient, potentially costly, self-giving love. And the source gets very specific about what a goat might look like in practice in a religious community.
What does it say? This is important.
It says a person who ends up being a goat might look really active on the surface. They might attend services regularly, give offerings, even serve on committees or hold leadership positions. The text uses phrases like "Jiot yuro non hyonjumdo nagondo bongsado hago simjiu noin sayakakaji hajiman." Outwardly, they give offerings, serve, maybe even do ministry work.
So they look the part. They could be pillars of the community.
They could be, but inwardly, their focus remains stubbornly fixed on this world, on worldly comfort, status, prosperity.
Like the people in Noah's day.
Exactly that comparison is made. Just eating, drinking, marrying, getting on with life, totally absorbed in hayansi isui byon young man prosperity in this present life only. They lack the true wisdom, the oil, the Holy Spirit's guidance, and the genuine faithfulness using their talents for God's kingdom work needed to be ready for the Lord's return.
And this inner state, this worldliness, becomes visible how?
Through their neglect of a least of these.
Mm.
Their failure to act, their failure to love their neighbor in these tangible ways exposes the fact that their claimed love for God was never real. They refused the core commandment. Love God, love neighbor. You can't do one without the other.
Okay, before we move to the timeline, we have to circle back to that crucial phrase, the least of these, my brethren. You mentioned the source argues this refers specifically to fellow believers, not just any needy person. Why? That's a significant interpretive choice.
It is significant, and it's often challenged because the humanitarian reading feels more inclusive. But the source bases this interpretation on the context within Matthew's gospel itself.
What context?
Primarily, how Jesus uses the term brethren, or brothers, adelphoi, throughout Matthew. Consistently, it refers to his disciples, his followers. Remember Matthew 12:50. Whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother.
Okay, so it's about spiritual kinship through obedience.
Right. And after the resurrection, in Matthew 28:10, he tells the women, go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee. It's consistently used for the community of faith.
So the argument is this final judgment, at least as presented here, isn't primarily about general philanthropy towards the whole world.
Although that's certainly valued elsewhere.
Right. But this specific test is about how those claiming to be his followers treat other followers, especially those who are struggling weak or marginalized within that community.
That's the interpretation put forward. The goats, remember, call him Lord. They claim affiliation. So the test becomes, is your claim genuine? Do you love the king enough to love his representatives even when they're inconvenient or unimpressive? If you claim to love the king you can see in glory, but you despise his struggling brother or sister you can see right next to you.
Then your claim is empty. It's hypocrisy.
Exactly. So the ultimate failure of the goats in this reading isn't just general selfishness, but a specific kind of covenant betrayal. They reject the very people the king identifies with most closely. Their lack of love and practical care reveals they never truly submitted to the king's lordship in the first place. Their initial yes to salvation, perhaps symbolized by receiving forgiveness, was ultimately hollow.
Their faith, as James might say, was dead, lacking works, specifically the work of loving the brethren.
Precisely. It's a failure of relational faithfulness within the community that bears his name. Hashtag tag 33, the eschatological timeline and creation's final goal.
Okay, so we've got the groups identified, the test clarified. It's about authentic love shown to the brethren. Now, let's zoom out again. The big picture. The kingdom for the sheep was prepared from the foundation of the world. That sounds like it ties into God's original plan for everything.
It absolutely does. The source connects this directly to God's ultimate purpose in creation. This prepared kingdom is identified with the concept of the seventh-day rest, the Sabbath completion, often symbolized by the 1,000-year kingdom, the Cheonyeon Wanguk.
The millennium.
Right. The idea is that the original goal for Adam, for humanity, was to reach this state of perfect fellowship and rest with God, completing the work of creation. The kingdom wasn't an afterthought. It was the intended destination from Genesis 1.
But things went wrong. Adam fell. So the kingdom was prepared, but then there's this other destination mentioned, the eternal fire. Who is that prepared for?
And this is a crucial distinction the source makes. The fire was prepared for the devil and his angels. It was not originally intended for human beings.
So humans weren't destined for hell.
Not according to this text's framing. The tragedy highlighted is one of choice. Many of Adam's descendants chose not to follow the Creator's path towards the prepared kingdom. They chose, instead, to align themselves with the adversary's rebellion, seeking worldly comfort, power, or autonomy over loving obedience.
And by doing that, they essentially opted into the destination prepared for the one they aligned with.
That's the implication. They chose the path that led to the fire. It wasn't their original assigned destination, but it became their chosen one. This contrast between the original intent, the prepared kingdom, and the chosen destiny, the fire, is really stark.
It really emphasizes the role of free will, which raises that massive question you alluded to earlier. Why? If God knew all this would happen, why go through this long, often agonizing process of history, judgment, and free choice?
This brings us to what the source calls the completion of free will. It's a profound concept.
Explain that. Why does free will need completion? And why is this whole process necessary for it?
The starting point is that the Creator gave genuine, uncoerced free will, Siantek Wan Ul Wanjian Hiwim, completely delegated the right to choose to both angels and humans. The reason this long, complex process of history and judgment is necessary, the source argues, is because the Son wants to publicly and eternally validate the perfect righteousness and goodness of his commands.
Validate them to whom? God already knows they're righteous.
Exactly. The validation isn't for God, it's for the entire created order. The goal is a final, eternal state where sin and even the possibility of sin, biamjoigamyumsang, are utterly eliminated.
How does this judgment achieve that?
Think about it. If judgment felt arbitrary, or if God simply forced everyone into compliance from the start, wouldn't a seed of doubt, a what if, potentially remain in the hearts of creatures throughout eternity? Could rebellion happen again?
Maybe, if they felt coerced rather than convinced.
Right. This process, culminating in a public judgment based on freely chosen actions, demonstrates beyond any doubt to all witnesses that every single soul who is condemned chose that path freely. They rejected clear commands, abundant grace, visible love demonstrated through the least of these. Their condemnation is seen as entirely just, a result of their own sustained choices, not divine caprice.
So the whole messy unfolding of history and this final judgment serves to establish the perfect justice and righteousness of God's rule, making future rebellion unthinkable because everyone understands the fairness of the outcome.
That's the idea. It secures the foundation for eternal peace and rest, where the possibility of sin is gone because the justice of God's ways and the consequences of rejecting them have been fully and publicly demonstrated. It's a necessary cosmic clearing of the slate.
Okay, that's a huge perspective. Now let's get practical again with the timeline. The source mentions that this parable, while powerful, kind of compresses events. It doesn't necessarily mean the final judgment happens the moment the sun returns. There's an interval.
Yes, a critical one, the 1,000-year millennium. This interval is key to understanding the nuances. The source suggests that if we take the sheep here, those invited to inherit the kingdom prepared from the foundation in a very specific sense. Meaning perhaps not all saved people throughout history, but specifically those who participate in the first resurrection. The Sungyojung in dual, often understood as the martyrs and exceptionally faithful witnesses.
Why symbol them out?
Because Revelation 20 says they are the ones who come to life first and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Hebrews speaks of martyrs seeking a better resurrection. This suggests a priority group judged worthy to rule.
So the sheep-goat judgment in Matthew 25 could primarily be about determining who qualifies for that first resurrection and the millennial reign. The sheep are the rulers.
That's one strong interpretation presented. It's an initial sorting at the start of the millennium, focused perhaps on the covenant community, to establish who will rule with Christ during that 1,000-year earthly kingdom. The sheep inherit that specific manifestation of the kingdom first.
Okay, so the separation happens. The sheep take their places as co-rulers. What happens during the 1,000 years? And what about other faithful people who weren't martyrs?
The 1,000 years is the period of Christ's reign on earth, fulfilling many Old Testament prophecies. After that millennium, Christ delivers the kingdom to the Father, leading to the final stages. It's then, after the 1,000 years, that the source suggests the rest of the faithful are raised.
And that's a different resurrection.
Yes, distinguished as the life resurrection. These are people whose sins were forgiven, whose faith was genuine, maybe verified by the same standard of loving action, but who weren't part of that initial ruling group. They are raised after the millennium to enter the ultimate eternal state, what the source calls the infinite world, Mugongzegi. That's the Father's final, perfected, everlasting kingdom beyond the millennium.
And the goats, where do they fit in this timeline? They don't face judgment immediately either.
According to this timeline, no. They wait through the 1,000 years. Their final judgment occurs at the very end of the millennium, at the Great White Throne Judgment, the Baekwojwa Daisenpen.
And that leads
directly to the Lake of Fire, which Revelation calls the second death, Dolje Sameng Got Bulmat. So while Matthew 25 presents the separation dramatically and immediately, the fuller eschatological picture includes this significant 1,000-year interval, differentiating roles, rulers versus inhabitants, and allowing for the final resolution of all things before evil is destroyed forever.
It's definitely more complex than the parable alone suggests. But what strikes me is that whether we're talking about judgment for the millennial rulers or the final judgment for everyone else, the fundamental standard seems to remain the same.
Absolutely. The timing might involve stages, but the criterion, that test of genuine faith evidenced by loving service to the least of these brethren, appears consistent throughout. It always comes back to love and action.
Which brings us right back to that core theological puzzle we identified earlier. Okay, the judgment is clearly based on conduct, on actions hengwi rol jijunilo. You did or did not feed the hungry. Very practical.
Undeniably, the text is explicit.
Yet foundational Christian theology insists salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, unahairoman, not by works. So how do we reconcile these? We can't just leave this hanging. How does the source explain this apparent paradox?
This is where the source offers a really crucial clarification on the mechanism of good works. It resolves the tension not by dismissing works, but by explaining their origin. Salvation is absolutely by grace, it argues, precisely because it's God who performs the righteous act through the believer. The Korean phrase "나를 통하여 하시기 때문이다" means because he does it through me.
So the good deeds aren't my achievement. They're God working in me.
Exactly. The visible conduct, the righteous acts, 위로 and hungry, like feeding the hungry or clothing the naked, are not seen as the cause of salvation or something we do to earn points. They are understood as the fruit, 열매, the natural, inevitable outgrowth of the Holy Spirit genuinely dwelling in a person's heart because they have received grace through faith.
So the works don't earn salvation. They demonstrate it. They're the evidence that grace has actually taken root and is transforming the person from the inside out.
Precisely. Think of Paul in Galatians 5 talking about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These aren't things we achieve by gritting our teeth. They're what the Spirit produces in a life submitted to Him. The person who has truly received grace will bear this kind of fruit. It will show up in their actions.
And conversely, the goats,
Yeah.
their lack of these actions shows.
It shows that grace, despite perhaps an initial acceptance or claim, never truly took root or transformed their hearts. Their failure to produce the fruit of love, especially towards the brethren, demonstrates that their faith wasn't real, saving faith. Their spiritual nakedness is revealed by their conduct, or lack thereof. The actions, or inactions, are the visible diagnostic result, not the price of admission.
So if a goat pleads, "But I believed, I accepted the forgiveness," the king's response, based on their conduct, is essentially, if that belief were genuine, if my life was truly in you, the fruit of love would have been evident. Your actions show your belief was superficial. It didn't change you.
That captures the essence of it, yes. They might have focused on the initial grace forgiveness, but they rejected the necessary ongoing submission to the king's lordship, which involves being transformed by his spirit and actually living out his command to love.
Okay, that makes sense theologically, but then another question arises. If God knows the heart perfectly anyway, why does he judge based on these external actions? Why is the conduct the public standard, not just the inner state of belief?
That's the second crucial piece of the puzzle, and it ties back to what we discussed about validating God's righteousness. The source calls it the audience of creation. Meaning, while God does know the heart perfectly and doesn't need external actions to judge accurately, the rest of creation doesn't have that insight. We can't perfectly see into someone else's heart or mind. The source even says we often don't fully understand our own hearts.
Sure enough.
So the law, the standard of conduct, was given partly to act like a mirror, revealing sin outwardly. God judges by this visible conduct so that the watching creation, the angels, other redeemed beings, can clearly see the justice of every single judgment, especially condemnation.
It's for cosmic transparency, to leave no room for doubt about fairness.
Exactly. When a goat is condemned, the judgment isn't just a secret decree based on hidden unbelief. It's linked to observable actions or inactions. The watching universe can see, yes, that person consistently neglected the needy, they failed to show love, their claim to follow the king was demonstrably false based on how they lived.
So the public judgment based on conduct ensures that God's character remains unimpeachable. Everyone sees the evidence. No one can claim the condemnation was unjust or arbitrary.
Precisely. It's vital for that completion of creation idea, establishing eternal peace based on universally acknowledged righteousness. It silences any potential questioning of God's justice forever.
This really elevates the importance of those 6 acts of mercy, doesn't it? They're not just nice things to do. They become the visible, court-admissible evidence of genuine, heart-transforming faith.
They become the litmus test, the true barometer. As John says, you can't claim to love God whom you haven't seen if you don't love your brother whom you have seen. It's impossible.
So these acts of service to the least of these brethren are the proof of cham medium true faith.
Yes, specifically, sarangiloseo yoksahanyo and medium faith working through love. That's the connection James makes too. Faith without corresponding action is dead.
Now let's pivot to the warning this implies, because the source is quite strong on this. The goats, in their confusion, are likely clinging to other things they did do, right? Religious activities they thought were sufficient.
Oh, absolutely. And the king essentially declares all that insufficient if the core element, love expressed in practical care for the brethren, is missing. This is a direct hit against superficial religiosity, against the very hypocrisy that defines the goats.
What kind of activities does the source mention as being insufficient?
It's quite a list, designed to show that even impressive religious performance doesn't count. It says it doesn't matter how much scripture you've memorized, how loudly you sing praises, whether you speak in tongues, how much money you give in offerings, or how much service you perform within the church structure.
Wow, that covers a lot of what people often consider signs of commitment.
It goes even further, connecting it to that passage in Matthew 7. Even dramatic, seemingly supernatural abilities, prophesying, casting out demons, even raising the dead or performing mighty miracles in the Lord's name, none of that guarantees you're a sheep.
Matthew 7:22-23. That's the passage where people say, Lord, Lord, didn't we do all these amazing things in your name? And he replies,
I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Or, you who practice lawlessness. It's terrifying. Clearly, performing miracles isn't the same as possessing saving faith or genuine relationship.
so where did they go wrong? What's the fundamental disconnect?
Their failure, echoing Matthew 23:23, was focusing on the minutiae of religious observance, like meticulously tithing garden herbs, mint, dill, and cumin, while completely neglecting what Jesus called the weightier matters of the law.
And those weightier matters are.
Justice gongwi, mercy or love, and faith or faithfulness, Jen. They nailed the easy, visible, measurable stuff, but missed the entire heart of God's commands.
Can you give an example of how someone might tithe herbs but fail at justice, mercy, and faith?
Sure. Imagine someone who prides themselves on giving exactly 10% of their income. They've got the mint and dill covered. But maybe they earn that income through exploitative business practices, treating employees unjustly, failing gongwi. Or perhaps they give generously to the church building fund, a visible offering, but they walk right past the homeless person outside the church, ignore the needs of the struggling family in their congregation, or gossip maliciously about others.
Failing in mercy, love.
And the faithfulness.
They might be faithful in attending services or performing rituals, in the sense of ritual correctness, but they lack true faithfulness to the character and commands of the king, particularly the command to love sacrificially. Their loyalty is to the form, not the substance.
So the goats are caught in the trap of mistaking religious activity for genuine spiritual transformation. They might have served an idea of God, maybe a powerful or demanding one, but they refuse to bow to the king who reveals himself in vulnerability and demands compassionate love for neighbors.
That's it. They perhaps embraced the initial forgiveness, but rejected the ongoing call to costly discipleship, the call to pick up their cross, deny themselves, and follow him on the path of righteousness, the path that inevitably involves loving and serving others, especially the least of these. Their lack of that active, costly love proves their faith was never the real saving kind, no matter how polished their religious veneer looked. That lack of love is the definitive sign of the goat. #OTRO. So when we pull it all together, this deep dive into Matthew 25, into the sheep and the goats, it really lands on this profound point. That final standard, caring for the least of these, it's not some alternative way to earn salvation through good deeds.
Right. It's not works righteousness sneaking in the back door.
No. Instead, it's presented as the necessary, the inevitable, the visible evidence that God's grace has truly grabbed hold of someone's heart and is producing its natural fruit, which is always ultimately love, self-giving love in action.
And if that fruit, that practical care, is missing.
Then the source concludes that the king's love, his grace, was never truly received and submitted to in the first place. Maybe his power was acknowledged, but his heart wasn't embraced.
And really thinking about this, understanding this text this way, it can't help but shift your perspective on everyday life, can it? It forces you to look past the big, flashy religious stuff, the impressive sermons, the miracles, the big donations.
Although those aren't necessarily bad in themselves.
No, of course not, but the focus shifts, doesn't it? It lands squarely on the small, often unseen, genuine acts of service, helping the person who needs it, visiting the lonely, offering that cup of cold water. Our eternal destiny, according to this passage, as interpreted by the source, seems less tied to how loudly we proclaim the King and more to how consistently and compassionately we serve him in his most vulnerable disguises.
And if we bring it back one last time to that cosmic scale, that big question hangs there, doesn't it? The Creator knew. From the beginning, he knew every choice, every outcome. He knew who would end up as sheep, who as goats.
So why? Why this long, complex, often painful journey through history with free will and judgment? The source raised the question, why invitation and counsel, not just coercion? Why not just force everyone onto the right path from the start?
It's a mystery we can't fully penetrate, perhaps, but it leaves us with this provocative thought to ponder. What does this insistence by the Creator on genuine, freely chosen love, a love pain, he pursued even knowing it would cost immense suffering, both his own and that of those who reject him, and require this elaborate process of validation? What does that tell us about the very nature of the eternal relationship he seeks?
It seems to suggest that anything less than truly free, uncoerced devotion, even with all its risks and potential for tragedy, wouldn't actually achieve the goal. A relationship based on anything other than freely given love wouldn't be the kind of eternal fellowship he intended when he prepared that kingdom from the foundation of the world.
It's a profound thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the ultimate test.
Indeed. Until next time.